Hello everybody, today I'm going to be cultivating wild yeasts from fresh apples in order to make my very first wild yeast starter. Eventually I'll use this wild yeast starter to make a wild cider, which is a cider that is made without the help of commercial yeasts. That means that I'll be relying solely on the living organisms inside of this fresh apple to ferment my cider. This is truly a throwback to the way that people have always made ciders before the onset of commercial yeasts. Creating a wild yeast starter may seem daunting, but it's actually quite simple, and it starts with creating the perfect environment for yeast to thrive. I sanitized a mason jar and poured in pasteurized apple juice so that the wild yeasts won't have to compete with unwanted bacteria. I then took some fresh apples from a nearby orchard, washed them thoroughly, and sliced them up. You see, the insides of these apples contain multiple strains of wild yeasts and bacteria that will become our yeast starter as they multiply. I add the apples, shake the jar, and then I place the jar in a warm spot around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. You can shake or stir the jar about 3 times a day and add more chopped apples about every 3 days to add more yeast. I can tell that the yeasts are growing and thriving when the mason jar pressurizes and I can see bubbles rising to the surface. Once the fermentation is fairly noticeable after about a week, it is ready to be used to ferment your cider. What you don't want is you don't want any mold or yeast to be growing at the surface of your starter. It should look just like your regular brews where you use commercial yeasts, where the yeasts are sitting down at the bottom of the starter instead of floating up at the top. Also, if you ever see anything that resembles a loogie floating around in there, that's also not good, and that also means game over, start over. And if instead of having a pleasant fruity aroma, it becomes vinegary, that's also game over. It means that bacteria took over your starter and there's nothing you can do about that. Using a wild yeast starter can be a bit trickier than using commercial yeast, as it can change the flavors, the aromas, and the fermentation speed. But that is the beauty of using wild yeast, because it adds a different character to our brews that you can never get from commercial yeast. When ready, it's very simple to use your wild yeast starter. Simply add it to your fermentation vessel and then add a sweet cider, apple juice, or apple juice from concentrate, and then allow your wild yeast starter to do the trick, but anticipate a difference in flavors, aromas, and fermentation speed. I hope you have an absolute blast cultivating your very own wild yeast starter at home. Hi everybody, I'm Sustainable Dan, and I'm so glad that all of you beautiful people are here today. If you had a good time watching this video, if you gained valuable information, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to become a part of this growing community, go ahead and subscribe and stay tuned for future content. For your convenience, I have all the steps on how to start your wild yeast starter down in the description below. As always, I'm so glad that you're here. I can't wait to see what we're doing next time, but until then, happy brewing.